Good evening, everyone. My name is Aarti, and I work with the WRI-India Cities team. And I'd like to welcome you all to the last session of today, a very pertinent and timely discussion, I believe, on mainstreaming climate action in India. With India swiftly urbanizing, the carbon intensity of its rapidly expanding urban middle class is yet to be locked in, as already across the world, cities and their citizens have begun to experience the effects of climate change. Understanding how cities can anticipate these effects, achieve mitigation, and become more climate resilient is key. In today's session, we will discuss how cities can build mitigation and adaptation capacities to manage long-term climate, especially by leveraging infrastructure investment. Now, I would first like to invite Dr. Daniel Bradley from the British High Commission in India to open the session today. Dr. Bradley has been a UK government advisor on international development issues since 2003 with experience across the global south. Based in New Delhi since 2013, he has coordinated the UK's policy and program collaboration with India on energy and climate change and leads a team whose partnership work with Indian stakeholders includes a range of subjects from climate change to clean energy transition, electric mobility, energy efficiency, and green finance. Over to Dr. Bradley.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me today. I'm really pleased to be joining you today for mainstreaming climate action in Indian cities, and delighted that in this session we will launch a new report, Seizing India's Urban Opportunity, which makes a really compelling argument that economic recovery and development investments should be made both low carbon and climate resilient in order to drive a path to green growth and development. I'm really happy that the UK government was able to support the development of this report. So congratulations to all the partners, to WRI-India, the Coalition for Urban Transitions, and other partners for working together on this call to action ahead of COP26 in Glasgow, which we're very proud to be hosting. So really, I wanted to say today that the rationale for this agenda is exceptionally strong. Much of the infrastructure that India will need over the next 20 years and beyond, particularly in cities, has yet to be built. And as governments put together economic recovery packages from COVID-19, the decisions that they make now will be really far-reaching, which presents a massive opportunity for us to take a new green path as we urbanize in a clean way. And Minister Puri spoke really powerfully yesterday in the session on the need for this kind of approach. And I think the benefits are really clear. Economic opportunity, green jobs, more livable cities, cleaner air, healthier communities. I think we can all agree that this is the kind of positive, low carbon, cleaner future that we want, rather than replicating the old polluting ways of the past. So the science is very clear that we need to act now and act very boldly. The impacts of the climate crisis are very real, very present. More and worse floods, more and worse droughts, more and worse extreme events. And India is one of the most vulnerable countries to these climate risks, which really undermine the development gains that have been made and have been so hard fought for in many of India's cities. So we're seeing these threats to urban infrastructure and threats to large numbers of highly exposed people. So simply put, climate change is threatening to put a brake on our future growth and prosperity, compounding the existing pressures from COVID, which have been felt really hard by India's cities and the urban poor. So I guess my message really is that every country, city, business, and part of society needs to follow that science and embrace this collective responsibility to keep the goal of 1.5 alive. That is, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, because by keeping 1.5 alive, we keep a sustainable growth and development story alive. So obviously, we're thinking a lot about COP26 in November. This will be a key moment where all countries come together to reaffirm their commitment to this agenda, ramp up global action in some of the key areas that are really going to affect cities, because cities are going to play a central role in this story. They contain the most people, they produce the most economic output, they create growth, jobs, opportunity, but equally they contribute most of the emissions and suffer most of the pollution. I mean, we're all suffer the fact that 22 of the world's 30 most air polluted cities are in India. And we're seeing a lot of action already in India to tackle some of these issues. We've seen the commitment to achieve 450 gigawatts of renewable energy. We've seen national programs on housing for all, rejuvenation and transformation, smart cities. And the UK is really a close partner with India on a range of initiatives. We're working together on the global coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure to make sure urban and infrastructure development is made more resilient. We're also working on climate resilient cities aligned with the smart cities mission, supporting cities to develop low carbon climate smart plans to attract investment. Also working on the energy side with state partners and central government to assess feasibility and create pilots for city decarbonisation to enable switches to clean energy. And with NITI Aayog and states, we're working to accelerate the transition to electric mobility. So working on a range of things, pilot projects for affordable housing using green tech, looking at how we link up our trade and investment partnerships to help build those kind of commercial links that will help to drive solutions. And with the Coalition for Urban Transitions, the C40 initiative and cities finance, we're supporting climate leadership in cities by supporting selected megacities in countries like India to plan and implement ambitious climate action. So just a range of areas where the UK and India are working really closely together on this agenda. But what else can we do, particularly on the path to COP26? The final point I wanted to make today is really about this idea of action that cities can join. And there I would really highlight the UN's Race to Zero, the largest ever alliance committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And I think there's a general consensus this is the best way to show commitment to this agenda by joining the biggest and most important global campaign of leaders from businesses, cities, regions, and investors for a healthy, resilient, zero carbon recovery that prevents some of these future threats while creating decent jobs and unlocking inclusive, sustainable growth. So let's seize that urban opportunity and spearhead India's progress towards an exciting, low carbon, resilient future. It's not just the right thing to do for our urban environments, it's also a very smart economic choice. So thank you very much for your kind attention. I wish you a great discussion today that can inspire even more action. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Dr. Bradley, for helping set up the discussion that we'll be having today, as well as the UK government's support on this report. To that end, I'd like to invite my colleague, Nick Godfrey, who's currently the co-founder and the director of the Coalition for Urban Transitions, which is an organization co-managed by WRI and C40 cities. I invite him to tell us a bit more about the coalition and the report series of which this India report is a part of, and to officially launch the India report. Nick.
Thanks, Aarti. A real tremendous pleasure to be here with you all today. Thank you for the invitation. I'm just going to share my screen and run through a few slides with you all today. So I think it's my role to spend the next 5 minutes just painting a picture globally of what we see as the global urban opportunity, and then Aarti will say something about how does this play out in the Indian context and what is the enormous opportunity that India and India's policymakers have to transform cities to support prosperity and climate safety. So I'm just going to say something about a major global report that we recently produced in partnership with a whole range of institutions. over the last 18 months or so to support the UK COP presidency. And we're enormously thankful to the UK government, but all of our partners, including WRI-India, that have helped us shape this effort. So first thing to say is, who is the Coalition for Urban Transitions? Arti just mentioned we're a major global initiative supporting the efforts of national governments to transform cities in ways that accelerate development and encourage climate action. And this report that we're launching today, Seizing India's Urban Opportunity, is part of a broader effort to support the UK COP presidency in building momentum ahead of COP26, and is part of a broader global report series that has been a collaborative effort created in consultation with experts and policymakers across 6 focus countries, including India, and has involved input from across 36 organizations spanning all 5 continents, and follows on from the foundational 2019 Climate Emergency Urban Opportunity Report that we produced in partnership with the UN Secretary General. So what does this global effort cover? Well, as I mentioned, the global report effort contains analysis for 6 key countries that account for over a third of global GDP, over 40% of CO2 emissions from fossil fuel use, and account for over 40% of the world's urban population. So China, Indonesia, Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, and of course, India. And Arti will say something more about the India report that forms part of the global series. But this chapter really explains how can India mobilize its national missions to unleash the full potential of climate smart cities. As I mentioned, this has been a partnership of many institutions. We're very lucky to be co-hosted by the World Resources Institute, the Ross Centre for Sustainable Cities, and C40, in partnership with a wide range of other institutions, all of whom you can see here. But what does the global picture look like? Well, in our view, national governments globally are facing 3 key challenges. The challenge of post-COVID recovery, and we know how devastating the crisis has been and has played out in India. National governments are facing the challenge of long-term development and enhancing well-being and prosperity for all of their citizens, and of course are confronted with the enormous global challenge of climate change. In our view, cities are right at the heart of helping national governments address this triple challenge. Cities produce over 80% of the world's GDP. They're home to well over half of humankind. So cities must be right at the heart of helping national governments address this triple challenge. The good news is that globally, we know the pathway. Great. The good news is that globally, we know the pathway to zero carbon cities. And this just gives you a sense of globally, it is possible, based on currently available technology and practices, to get to close to net zero by mid-century with major investments across the built environment, transport, waste, material efficiency, and decarbonisation of the electricity supply. Yes, that will require new investment globally of the order of magnitude of 2% of global GDP, an additional 2% year on year for the next 3 decades. But our analysis shows that that will generate enormous returns. In fact, returns with a net present value of over $24 trillion by mid-century and support an enormous number of new jobs, 87 million in 2030, 45 million by mid-century. So not only can we get there, but it will generate significant economic and wider dividends. We've shown what the scale of the economic dividends look like with that type of investment profile across the 6 countries that I mentioned before, and Arti will say more about what that means in the case of India. But India can make an incremental investment out to mid-century in the order of $3.6 trillion, but that would generate significant returns, a net present value based on direct savings alone of close to $2 trillion. So in simple terms, the benefits exceed the costs by at least $2 trillion based only on direct cost savings alone, setting aside all of the other ancillary benefits. We also know the job dividends will be significant in India, 8.2 million in the next decade alone, and you can see how this plays out in the other 5 countries that I mentioned. my final message really is that, we looked at, well, who needs to do what to drive this type of urban transformation? And globally, national leadership is absolutely fundamental to complement local leadership by mayors and other municipal leaders. National governments or higher tiers of government have primary authority over the measures required to achieve 2/3 of global urban abatement potential, including decarbonisation of urban electricity. And we know in China and India, for example, that the share is significantly higher. So the role of national government is absolutely fundamental to complement that of other tiers. We've launched this year a global call to action where we call on national governments in partnership with urban leaders and financial institutions to go faster and further, working together to help transform cities globally. National government should develop an overarching strategy to deliver shared prosperity with cities right at its heart, pursuing national policies to support compact, connected, clean and resilient cities. And I want to congratulate the Indian government for the steps that they're taking. Urban leaders should work together with national governments to support this transformation. And clearly the IFIs and DFIs should work together to build a multilateral system fit for purpose, one that fosters inclusive, resilient and zero carbon cities. And Dan mentioned before some of the steps the UK government is taking in this regard. So thank you very much. I hope that sets the scene of what we see as the moment to really seize the urban opportunity. I'll hand over to Aarti to walk us through what this looks like in the context of India in more detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. And having worked on the India chapter myself, I'm happy to share additional details on some of the findings from the report. I'll just share my screen. Can you see my screen? All right, so as has already been said, we are urbanizing very quickly. In numbers, what that means is that in 2018, India was approximately 35% urban, with a population of 461 million. But by 2050, we're going to add another 400 million to hit 877 million, or almost 53% urban, and providing decent housing, public services and jobs for so many people in such a short time, and doing so equitably and sustainably is a daunting challenge. On the poverty front, India's already made significant progress. We've lifted over 270 million people out of multidimensional measures of poverty between 2005 and 2015 alone. But COVID hit really hard, and especially the informally employed, with the number of people living under $2 per day growing by an estimated 75 million last year alone. Creating jobs was a massive task even before COVID. A McKinsey report estimated that India would need to absorb 90 million workers that were either entering the labor force or moving from farm to non-farm sectors between 2018 and 2030. And that's not to mention the massive gender gap that currently exists in employment, which would require an additional 55 million jobs. And finally, providing this workforce with housing, mass transit, water and energy infrastructure is another massive challenge that lies ahead. So obviously, the Indian government has recognized the importance of cities in its vision for the future and has established a slew of national programs. These include Amrit, Swachh Bharat, PMAY, the Smart Cities Mission. And between 2015 and 2019, about 54,000 crore rupees was invested in these schemes, and another 66,000 crores has been budgeted since. Under PMAY, 10.9 million units of affordable housing have been approved, 4.1 million completed by the end of 2020, and another 3 million under construction. And the scheme has also created an estimated 23 million jobs. And finally, to complement these programs, the government has launched an ambitious India investment grid, which is led by the Ministry of Finance and Corporate Affairs. And this aims to mobilize $1.5 to $2 trillion in public and private investments to finance the national infrastructure pipeline. In addition to the schemes under the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, other ministries have launched several other schemes and programs to support these efforts. We're investing heavily in improving public transport systems in India. These include metro rail projects and feeder services and infrastructure to integrate other modes of transport with the metro. As of end of 2020, there were more than 700 kilometers of metro rail lines operational in 18 cities across the country, with another 1,000 kilometers under construction. India is also prioritizing building energy efficiency through the Cooling Action Plan launched by the Ministry of Environment, which aims to reduce cooling energy and refrigerant demand by 30% over the next 20 years. The growing demand for shared mobility offers an opportunity for India to lead in innovating technology and business models in the electric mobility space. This is through the Ministry of Heavy Industries FAME scheme, which will promote the manufacture of electric and hybrid vehicle technology, incentivize demand, and improve charging infrastructure. And finally, energy efficiency offers a major opportunity for savings and GHG reductions. Amongst the Ministry of Power's many initiatives for energy efficiency, one of particular promise is the work of the Super ESCO Energy Efficiency Services Limited, EESL, which is a joint venture between 4 utilities. And since its establishment in 2009, it has helped India achieve 47 billion kilowatt hours in annual energy savings. So where next? For this report, analysis and modeling was carried out by the Stockholm Environment Institute using a bottom-up approach and developed using data from the International Energy Agency, Climate Watch, Global Buildings Performance Networks, and a few other data sources. And the modeling shows that over half of India's urban abatement potential to 2050 actually comes from cities with fewer than 1 million residents today, as against 25% in larger cities of over 5 million. And further, sectorally speaking, residential buildings hold 52% of the cumulative abatement potential identified, commercial buildings another 20%, and transport 15%. But across sectors, nearly half the total abatement potential depends on decarbonizing electricity. In 2019, India got 76% of its power supply from fossil fuels, mainly coal, but has pledged to increase the share of non-fossil fuel installed capacity to 40% by 2030. So as Nick had already said, building on the analysis from the Stockholm Environmental Institute, the Vivid Economics analysis calculated that incremental investments needed from now until 2050 to implement these selected decarbonization measures in India would be about 3.6 trillion. But as we said already, would pay for themselves through energy and material cost savings. In particular, transport offers a particularly attractive opportunity. $79 billion invested by 2050 could bring returns with a net present value of $1.4 trillion. It would also have the added benefit of reducing air pollution and traffic congestion. So finally, what are some of the avenues of opportunity in urban development to unlock this identified abatement potential? First off, we've identified that the government of India has an ambitious urban agenda, from the national missions to the infrastructure pipeline, and all this has the potential to build resilience, accelerate decarbonization, and improve living conditions for all. But making the most of these opportunities will require a systematic approach of actually aligning these national schemes and policies with the vision of climate smart cities. Next, as already mentioned, cleaning and greening energy is vital. Through the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, the Ministry of Power has already launched a number of initiatives targeting urban programs on lighting, commercial buildings, and appliances. In addition, the National Mission for Enhanced Energy Efficiency has also set up 2 funds to enable project financing for and within cities. The market potential for these programs is estimated at about $10 billion. A key barrier to ambitious mitigation and adaptation action in many cities is limited institutional capacity. Cities need the funds, the technical know-how, and the capacities that, and the institutional support needed to operationalize national climate ambitions. Each level of government has resources and capacities that can be leveraged. The national government has vital resources. The state governments control land policy and acquisition, and local governments are probably best positioned to engage communities. And finally, though car ownership in Indian cities is rising, a large number of trips still involve public or non-motorized transport, and it is crucial to improve service for this large share of the population, prioritize them in road design, and improve safety for them. Now, one of the key themes of the Seizing the Urban Opportunity report series is actually how can insights from the 6 countries inform efforts by other national governments, development practitioners, and financial institutions. Essentially, how can we learn from the experiences and trajectories of other countries? To that end, I would like to introduce our next 2 speakers who will speak to their respective national experiences. Rohit, I'd like to, okay, thank you. So first we have Stephanie Chetty, the Acting Chief Director for Urban Development Planning at the National Department of Cooperative Governance in South Africa. Ms. Chetty manages and supports provincial and municipal implementation of the Integrated Urban Development Framework, and has previously worked at the National Department of Rural Development of Land Reform as a Chief Town and Regional Planner. The floor is yours, Ms. Chetty.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Thank you for this opportunity, and good afternoon to everybody from South Africa. I am from the National Department of Cooperative Governance, and I'm so highly appreciated to be on the session today to share in some of the learnings and findings on what South Africa is doing in contribution towards seizing the urban opportunity. As mentioned earlier by Nick Godfrey, that we are one of the 6 countries that have been selected as well. So I'm just going to give you an overview in terms of our policy perspective and how do we then unpack some of the learnings and the findings. My presentation is detailed, so I will be skipping through lots of the slides, but the presentation will be made available for sharing. So I'm just going to give you an overview of our national policy called the Integrated Urban Development Framework, zoom into some of its focal aspects and alignment to what we're currently doing towards resilient cities. So just on conversation that everybody has already spoken about urbanization, the impacts that it has on climate change, and how do we then plan towards resilient cities and towns and integrate it to become more smarter as well in our approach. So we looked at how do we confront the spatial inequality that we see here in South Africa, who is fostering inclusion, what opportunities lie for citizens in South Africa, and who governs our cities and towns, and who shapes them. So we've developed our national urban policy to address urbanization and spatial transformation called the Integrated Urban Development Framework. And its vision is to create livable, safe, integrated, economic, inclusive, and globally competitive cities and towns where active citizenship exists. So part of the vision is linked very nicely to the vision of the World Resource Institute in creating compact, connected, clean and resilient cities. And the IUDF aims to improve the way we do planning at a national government, right down to provincial and local, through 4 strategic goals, which is spatial integration, inclusion and access, growth and governance. And key to the priorities, the strategic priorities is urban resilience, urban safety, and urban-rural linkages. So this is just the key programs that are focused on the IUDF at a metro level and at a provincial level and at a small town. The policy aim for the IUDF is aligned to our spatial planning aspects in line with the Smart Cities framework that we have also embarked on. These are some of the classifications that you see within South Africa for metropolitan cities, intermediate cities, and with small towns. So just understanding what is the IUDF in terms of addressing the vision to creating compact, connected cities and towns for both urban and rural. It is to ensure that we create a vision of cities and towns that reduces travel costs and distances, aligning to land use, transport planning and housing, preventing development of housing in marginal areas, increasing urban density and reducing sprawl, and shifting towards development that creates more densification and including linkages of public transport. So we recently embarked on the IUDF Implementation Plan 2025 with a focus on addressing more integrated approach towards planning, focusing on a presidential focus of the district development model, championship, partnering, seeding action, and peer learning reviews. So the IUDF just associates and shows the linkages between our national policies and plans. So we've just also shared a bit of the high level political structures, our IGR structures that we thought that would be useful for WRI-India and their climate action and how they can also learn from some of these findings. Associated to urban resilience is very critical in terms of linking the IUDF 9 policy levers. So I've included a diagram there that shows the association between how important urban resilience is in planning linked with urban safety and urban-rural linkages. I'm going to skip a few slides because I know I have less time and I want to focus in on what's critical and important. In South Africa, we have both your urban and your rural aspects, and our metros are doing quite well in terms of development. But what we found is that there's a lack of integration between spatial planning that happens at a small town or a rural area associated with metro. So we've embarked as national government to develop a strategy that will address regeneration, restoration, and fulfilling economic potential for underperforming towns. And this also includes urban resilience into the aspect and climate action on how do we then develop these towns. So we have recently developed a strategy, and the strategy will be formally launched, and we will be piloting in 3 towns as illustrated in the diagram above. We've also associated ourselves with the UN Habitat to implement the UN system-wide guidelines on safer cities and human settlements, and we will embark that in 10 municipalities in South Africa. And what we found then in terms of looking at urban resilience, we also took back a step in terms of developing a smart cities framework and how then to guide decision making and to share in local and international learnings and the realities on the ground, but not to not look at the preconditions of becoming smarter, but enablers such as a smart city plan, digital infrastructure, skilled people, partnerships, and community involvement, which also then involves climate action and resilience mitigations towards planning and achieving the compact, connected, and clean, resilient cities and towns. A few of our partnerships, and I want to zoom into the one with the World Resource Institute, is about understanding then with the National Department of Cooperative Governance, how do we link then spatial and economic development? How do we then also then share in ideas from rapid economic and employment recovery in terms of COVID-19 and get dialogues and conversations going? And then how do we plan together to focus on urban development and share in data analysis and urban resilience, building knowledge and coordination between our various cities and national authorities? So we have recently then embarked on work in South Africa. And as mentioned by Nick earlier, there's a chapter in South Africa on seizing urban opportunity, and it was launched on the 28th of July. And it's to tackle urban poverty and inequality that exists. And the report highlights 6 key ways for South African government to ensure robust, socially accelerated transformation. And this includes accelerated policy reforms, pro-poor urban measures in the heart of plans, and understanding then how LED forms an important role, and then prioritizing improved mobility to lower income residents, and revamping housing strategies, and how do we then prioritize going forward, and providing targeted support for cities to make a difference on economic structures, and then protect and restore the ecosystems in and around cities, in investing in greening and urban landscape. So those are that. We have also then started another initiative with the Urban Water Resilience Initiative in 2 of our metros, being the city of Johannesburg and Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. So what we thought that's key coming out from the session today is how do we then share with the various institutions on the platform and organizations and countries here today, and how do we collaborate and move towards urban resilience and climate action? And what does it mean then to foster an all of society approach in developing these climate actions for cities and towns, and how important it is for enabling seeding action in the development and design as we move forward with our various strategies and plans associated with our urban resilience and seeding urban action. So in terms of championing, what does it mean? And I know that South Africa has embarked on many examples that we are welcoming and we can learn from and share in ideas. And then how do we access available funding for climate action given economic conditions brought about by COVID? And then another one is how do we build and sustain our various partnerships? So very useful, and I leave you with this. From South Africa's side, we really recommend peer learning reviews and support and collaboration on this. I think it'll be a really interesting process to learn from what other countries are doing, particularly in showcasing and sharing some of our examples from South Africa regards to climate action and the interventions that we have taken, and then also then learning both internationally and nationally from everybody here on the platform. Program Director, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Chetty. That was fascinating. I think South Africa's climate ambition feels very familiar, and some of the challenges as well. Finally, I'd like to introduce our next speaker to share his experience with China, and I'd like to also let our audience know that you can enter your questions on text, and after Daizong has spoken, we will open the floor for some questions. So next, I have my colleague from WRI China, Daizong Liu. Mr. Liu is the director of WRI China's Ross Center for Sustainable Cities and has led and managed a number of projects, including ones on mass transit, congestion, road safety, and sustainable and livable cities. Over to you, Mr. Liu.
Okay. See my screen? Sorry, I don't know what problems.
We just had some technical difficulty. Over to Daizong.
Oh, sorry, I don't know why they have some technical problem. Now, can you see my screen? Okay, great. So I'm very happy to talk about Chinese cities' experience from the early peaking to the carbon neutrality. First of all, I'm from WRI China, so we help China to promote the climate ambition. This slide just show you how how important of China's role in the global climate cooperation, because today we are the largest CO2 emission country and almost twice of the United States. So this is why China play a very important role in the global climate cooperation. And the last year, China committed to the international global that we want to achieving carbon peaking before 2030 and the carbon neutrality before the 2060. And this year, they are more clearly to say that the carbon neutrality means the GHG emissions zero, not only the CO2 emission, that also includes the non-CO2 fossil fuel. And based on this two carbon peaking and the carbon neutrality goal, China have some detailed plan how to reduce the emission intensity, also increase the non-fossil fuel in energy sector, and increase the wind and solar powers, and also increase the carbon sink. So this is some details of the target by the China. And then we can find in Chinese, the cities play very critical things, because 80%, 85% of the energy-related carbon emission is from the city level. So the city, how we can achieving the carbon zero city is very important for the Chinese climate ambition. And here show you the urbanization situations in China. Today, China have a 63% of the urban the population is urbanized. So that's 60 is almost 1 billion the citizen. And as our target by the 2035, we will reach to the 75% of the urbanization rate, and the 80% by the 2050 is almost close to the OECD countries, the average rate. And so this means today China not only focus on the urban planning, the new town plannings, but also need thinking about the regeneration, the existing situations. And during the last 10 years, China city already started to do a lot of things. For example, we have a national program named the Low Carbon Palette Cities and the Province Initiative. This is launched by the 2010. It's almost 11 years ago. And today we have 87 low carbon palette cities in the nationwide. It's almost take upon 1/3 of China's population. So they are committed. So this 87 cities were receiving the funding from the national, and also they have dedicated funding to build up the early peaking cities. And first of all, this pilot city need to restructure the governance to more easily to measurement the carbon emission. So this initiative is launched by the Ministry of NDRC, and then directly go to the municipal government. So municipal government will build a low carbon leading group, for example, the mayor office, and also where they will do very special the low carbon city planning, and then they will go to the special annual targets and the projects to propose by proposal to do the carbon early peaking projects. And then this project will have a post-evaluation. And this post-evaluation will go back to the municipal government and also go to the national level. And they also go to the public, and they have the rank, how the progress of each city. And today, you can find here, the green dot means that the city set the goal to early peaking during the 14th 5-year plan of China. That means before the 2025. And the yellow dot cities means they were achieving the early peaking by the 2026 to 27. The red one is a little bit slow. They were achieving before the 2030. So that is a 15th 5-year plan of China. And what they are really doing after the goal of the early peaking, they will do some in the planning phases. The pilot city will pass legislation, they will define the emission peaking target and the roadmap. And very interesting, they will also put the low carbon development as one KPI to the city officers, like the mayors. And they will establish the low carbon mayor's office, like in Guangyuan and Chongqing. They really have the climate change response department. And also they need to coordinate with other pilots, and they will make some low carbon association, not only for the public sector, also invite the corporation, the private sector together to promote the early peaking. And during the construction phases, they will require carbon emission assessment for the larger infrastructure investment. So if you cannot pass this assessment, you cannot have this kind of infrastructure be constructed. And they will have a more dedicated fund for low carbon industry, include R&D and construction. And also they can subsidy this kind of work. And they will conduct some pilot in the neighborhood community level to promote the low carbon community pilots. And also in some cities like Ningbo and Shenzhen, they promote the near zero carbon emission zone, quite similar as London. That's focused on the clean energy vehicle can go into inside this region. So this is during the construction phases how they are doing. And in the end users phases, they will conduct the GHG inventory work to identify very high emission sector, and they want to establish the carbon emission data platform, and they want to build up the trading systems for in the city level. For example, in Beijing, the carbon emission trading pilots for some organization, and low carbon product labeling and the certification. So that means the customer buy the food from the supermarket, they can know how many CO2 emissions created by this good and food. So that is all what we have done for the years. Today, we need moving forward from the early peaking to the carbon neutrality. So WRI China, we are working with the ministry and the local city together to help them to promote. And we have such kind of plan. First of all, China still have 20% of urban in the new areas. So that's why we want to promote a very compact urban planning system. So the World Bank and the GEF, they launched a TOD pilot projects in 7 Chinese cities. They want to concentrate the land use along the public transportation corridors. So this is what we want to do for the new towns planning. But most of the Chinese cities are in the existing situations. We need to think about the urban regeneration. So in these areas, we have 5 key areas in Chinese carbon neutrality cities, like buildings, transportation, industry, waste management, and the carbon sink. This is the 5 areas for the urban regeneration to promote the carbon neutrality. For example, today they are thinking about the climate adaptive buildings. They want to integrate the energy and the solar powers together with the building when you regenerate the building. And they want to use a circular economy to put the waste to the energy. And also they want to think about the energy storage, which can be better used to utilize the renewable energy. And also they do distribution, very micro energy systems, and like a microgrid or vehicle to energy, these kind of things to make the building more efficient for the energy use. And secondly, they want to prevent the common mistake what had happened before. For example, they want to make some mistake for the low density, the urban sprawl. And in some area of China, the heating cost is calculated based on the square meters of apartment. But in the future, we want to calculate based on the CO2 emissions created by this the heating. And also like the glass curtain wall, they have a lot of, for example, that's a railway station in Shanghai using the glass curtain wall. So it's quite not energy efficiency. And we need to thinking about the super high-rise buildings. So China now today eliminate very super high, more than 500 meters high high-rise building. And also the central eye condition is a problem today, how we think about to improve the quality. So this is some mistake. And in transportation sector, and we I still have 3 slides. So in transportation sectors, we can find the vehicle electrification can contribute 35% of the road transportation emissions mitigation, and the clean green can contribute 18%, and the VKT reduction can contribute 12%, and the modal shift can contribute the 35%. So this is measures together to promote the transportation sector, how to reduce the CO2 emission. And the waste management, they want to establish the multi-level recycling systems for high efficiency, efficient resource use, like to define the waste management and the price standard. So in the future, you will, if you they want to promote the zero waste to the cities and reduce the proportions of the disposable products and some configurations and utilized. And the last one is a carbon sink. So they want to build a city combined with the park, also build a city in the park. And based on that one to promote the desertification control or develop the electricity, water, soil, forest, sink models together and promote the biomass carbon capture and storage. So that's all China thinking. WRI China work with the local city, how to help the city from the early peaking to the carbon neutrality. But we thinking India city need to fully understand the difference between China and India. For example, the India cities may be in the different urban development phases. Some Chinese city already very post the industrialization phases. And we have a different urban planning system. China combined the top-down and the bottom-up together as planning systems. And we also have a different in the urban construction phases. China is focused on both the new cities and the urban regenerations. So, and the last one is different in the urban land properties right. So that's quite different because China, the land is owned by the government, by the state, so they can easily use a lot of way by the land control. So that's very quickly to brief what China want to do from early peaking to the carbon neutrality. And I want to more discussion later with our India friends. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Liu and Ms. Chetty. I have to agree with Ms. Chetty. There is definitely scope for peer learning across our respective countries' experiences, whether in terms of how pilot projects help in building buy-in from local government, or even exploring the different kinds of governance structures and reforms that might help to operationalize some of these climate action plans. Before we move to the last section of our session today, I think we'd like to show one more quick video on the Cut Report series. So thank you again to Mr. Liu and Ms. Chetty. I don't think there were any questions that came through on the platform, so I think we'll move on to the last section of today's session, where we'll have a panel of experts from across India further explore some of the topics that came up in discussion so far today and to share their experience working to mainstream climate action in India. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Hitesh Vaidya, the current director of the National Institute of Urban Affairs. He has over 20 years of experience in the field of urban management, urban governance, and capacity building, not to mention strong experience working with local government. Welcome, Mr. Vaidya. Our second panelist is Mr. Shwetal Shah. Mr. Shah is a technical advisor climate change for the government of Gujarat, India. He has worked on Gujarat's climate policy, adaptation and mitigation strategies, and climate finance, and in particular has been instrumental in drafting the state's renewable energy policies and the state action plan on climate change. Our final panelist is Mr. Raj Cherubal. Mr. Raj Cherubal is the CEO of Chennai Smart City Limited and has worked on various projects on traffic, sustainable transportation, and urban planning, and has written extensively to promote decentralization and good urban governance. Finally, though I'm sure he needs no introduction, I'd like to introduce the moderator for our panel today, WRI India's own CEO, Mr. O.P. Agarwal. Previously a member of the Indian Administrative Service for many years, he was also the World Bank's Global Urban Transport Advisor and has written several papers on urban transport policy and governance issues. I'll hand it over to O.P. sir to kick off the panel.
Thanks very much, Aarti, and thanks to all the presenters. To me, it was absolutely fascinating. But the message I get from all this is 3 or 4 big messages that I'm taking away from this. 1, cities are growing. 2, most of the economic growth will happen in cities. And 3, most of the carbon emission growth will also happen in cities. So these are the 3 big messages I'm taking. And that's why if we have to work towards a net zero or work towards a 1.5 degree, our countries will have to focus a lot on their cities. Fortunately, in India, we have recently started the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs through the National Institute of Urban Affairs, which is Hitesh, who leads the NIUA, has started a climate smart cities program. for the first time that I have seen in that ministry where I've worked for quite some time, a focus on climate. I think that's a very positive sign that I'm seeing happening, a very positive sign. Hitesh is going to lead that work, of course, working with all the other cities across the country. But let me start asking Hitesh this question. Hitesh, this seems to be an ambitious task. And if I ask you, what you see are the one or two major barriers to implementing climate action in cities or taking climate action forward, what would be your response to that?
Thank you, sir, and thank you for inviting me. I take this opportunity to thank WRI and Connect Karo to invite me for this. Mindful of time, I'll be very quick. Just to everybody's knowledge, we, as Professor Agarwal talked about climate assessment framework, it was the first time we are applying this climate lens to the infrastructure projects, which under the smart cities it's happening. We have conducted 126 cities, which is like 0.5 million to more than 1 million, and 28 indicators broadly on energy and green building, urban planning and green cover, mobility and air quality, water management, and waste management. These were 5 thematic areas under which covered. And to the specific question, sir, the key asks from the cities during this whole thing was, you need to build our capacities. You need to give us tools where we can, what are those standards in these areas? You need to give us a templates to come up with the climate action plans. You need to give us technologies which we can apply within our system. Actually, you need to give us transfer the best practices from global, which we can contextualize, and training and capacity building, hand-holding, which will be last. So it requires a both individual and institutional capacity building, which is what the key asks were. So if I ask the 5 key asks which have come up from the results, and I will say that it was quite a positive results which we got it, but the key asks coming from the cities were in these 5 categories: give us tools, give us templates, give us training, give us technology information, and handhold us for a long time. So this is a key area, and if we took it, use the same language which I think the language of climate has to be the language of the cities who are executing those words. And if that is the one we do, I think we are in the right path to move forward.
Thanks, Hitesh. I think very interesting when you say language of the climate has to be the language of the cities. Very often we see the language used in climate is a mystery to people in the cities.
Yes.
And how do you demystify that language and get them to understand what this whole thing is about? If I read you right, you're saying that is one big thing that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Let me move to Raj. Raj, you're perhaps, I'm told, the only smart city CEO who's a professional. Most others have been taken from municipal corporations. You are the one unique out of 100 who's there. What is your view on this? From the smart city side, what do you see is the big challenge to climate action at the city level? Let's say, would you agree with Hitesh? Do you think there is a challenge there? What is it that can be done? Your thoughts. Okay, so can we, while he fixes, let me go to Mr. Shwetal Shah. Mr. Shwetal Shah, you are the technical advisor in the climate change department in the government of Gujarat. You must be facing the same problem in dealing with different departments of the state government in attending to climate action. They have a lot of priorities in terms of infrastructure to be developed. A lot of their focus is on building the right infrastructure, catching up with the infrastructure. When you go to them and talk to them about climate, what is it that you see? What do you think can be done to really enthuse them to understand climate and take action towards climate?
Shwetal, you're muted. Shwetal, you're muted.
Are you able to hear me now? This is Raj.
Yeah.
Yeah, Raj, go ahead. Did you hear my question?
Yes, I did. Yeah. So I think, since time is of essence, see, I think the problem is that with everything else, climate change is a very, sorry to say, that's a very theoretical problem still. If you ask most people in India, and especially engineers and so on, everybody's heard about climate change, yeah, but what am I supposed to do about it? And this is where I think the problem is. So for example, in a city or in a country where we are having difficulty with basic things, right? Should we do flyovers or should we do footpath? Should we buy buses or should we build an elevated corridor? That the debate in many places is even at that level. But on an optimistic note, I would say Chennai, and I'm sure some of the other cities have done some very strategic projects. Like for example, whether it's the pedestrian plaza, parking management system, bike sharing, these are all extremely painful projects to get done in any country. But in India, it makes it even more difficult because, first of all, why would you want to reduce the carriageway, for example? That's the first question that comes up. Why would you want to give charge for parking when it's supposed to be free? Who cycles around in a hot country like ours? So I think sometimes it's kind of encouraging to watch the representative from China show their ideas. At the same time, it's kind of a little bit depressing also because our discussions are so much basic that we have a long way to go. But I think Chennai and a bunch of cities have done some strategic steps forward. These are very difficult strategic steps. But I think now is the time for us to start scaling these things. Whether it is pricing in parking, whether it is pricing in electricity, getting the pricing right, so that all these ideas are scalable and not just token pilots here and there. So I think many cities have shown the examples, and we have learned from Pune and Bangalore and others. And I'm hoping that others have learned from us. First of all, the good news is that people are taking it very seriously. I think the Tamil Nadu government has said the right things and started departments and policies to address climate change, which is a very, very welcome and very refreshing change. But now the question is, like Hitesh pointed out, how do we translate it into action? Does this mean more footpath? Does this mean buses? Does this mean more Miyawaki forests? How do you translate it into action is where the problem is, including, for example, people will say buy electric bus. But it's not simply a question of buying electric bus, right? It's the logistics, where would you put up these charging station? All these kinds of nitty-gritties have to be worked out. And these are not going to be easy in an Indian system unless there's a lot of capacity building and hand-holding to be done.
Thanks, Raj. Let me unfortunately, Mr. Shah is not able to join us. I think he's got pulled into some other meeting. So it'll really be between three of us that this conversation will happen. We'll probably not take more than another 10 or 15 minutes, but let me take advantage of this time to ask you, dig a little deeper. A lot of climate action, as we call it, is really action in many other forms. For example, cities are investing in public transport. They may not know that this is climate action, but they're investing in public transport for a variety of other reasons. It could be to ease congestion. It could be to improve air quality. There are multiple things that cities are doing. Electric buses are partly to improve air quality, partly to reduce dependence on imported fuels. How much do you think, at the city level, people understand that whatever they are doing right now is also contributing to climate? Do they see that linkage between whatever they're doing?
Actually, that's a very, very good question, because sometimes what happens, we used to joke here in Chennai that if some cities, for example, they may change one lamppost and then they'll declare it the greatest climate change initiative ever, right? Chennai, for example, a city of 10 million people, have completely gone from sodium to LED. And I don't have the numbers, but what I remember is the savings in carbon, money, electricity, etc. is so amazing that C40 representatives were saying, any other city, they would have made a big deal out of this and, got some United Nations award or something like that. We quietly went ahead and did the LED change, and it's just moved on to the next problem, right? So I wouldn't be too pessimistic, because we are doing a lot of things without calling it climate change or without calling it something specific. But but having said that, like any problem in India, the problem is scalability. Doing one thing here, one thing there is very easy. So a simple example I'll give you. I think somewhere in 99 or 2000, I remember going to Israel and I looked down from my hotel. I saw solar panel heater on every roof, right? This was almost 21 years ago. I always ask this question: in a country drowning in solar power, right? How come I can't see a single, balcony or whatever with solar panel? And I suspect it has more to do, not to do with the idea of climate change. It is to do with financing. I can buy a 40 lakh rupee car without any money in my pocket because there's some financing mechanism behind it. But I just can't figure out how to put a solar panel on my roof without having to carry some 10 lakh rupees to a dealer or something. So I think the policy sounds beautiful, but translating that into market and action, we always focus on government footpath and government buses, but a lot of it is also private sector, right? So unless you, for example, price or make life very easy to buy a solar panel, or the other way around, make it very difficult to build bad buildings, non-green buildings, because of the way pricing is done, for example. So for example, Smart City right now, we're building a platinum green building for ourselves and for the various offices. It's not easy to do it, right? It's not easy. It's far easier to simply build a box-like structure and put some conventional AC and conventional and this and that, than to actually do green building. So my point is, it's not easy to do one this or one that, but how do you scale to a country of X crores people and 10 million people in the city and so on? That gap seems to be very serious. From policy to action seem to be a little bit of a leap, and we need to figure out how to do that. And last point I'll make in this one also is that even when something, for example, a solar panel, right? We Smart City, we did solar panel project, and once we did it, that savings is tremendous in terms of money, electricity, and so on. But getting that project off the ground was one of the most difficult things. I thought it'll be the easiest. You just go and buy solar and put it up there and it'll be done. The number of subsidies, I mean, the complications, the left hand has to go right, right has to go left. You have to fly to Delhi once in a while. You have to, run around the city figuring out who's supposed to do chicken, and a lot of chicken and eggs we have created in our system. And I know I'm oversimplifying, but the point is, not many people are going to have the patience to go through all this just because they're environmentally friendly or, they care about climate change. In order to scale, we have to make things so easy, like going and buying a car. I mean, ironically, buying a car is so much easier than doing many of those climate friendly things. So I think we need to seriously look at scalability and not assume everybody is going to be an environmentalist or everybody is going to care about climate change. But the markets have to function, prices have to function, and of course, government projects have to function.
Great, great. Lovely hearing you, Raj. Let me now shift to Hitesh again and then come back to you again, Raj. But Hitesh, you talked about capacity building. You talked about the need for tools, the need for templates. I think Raj has also articulated the same thing about the need for capacities. And you have this climate smart cities, the C-Cube framework. You have the Cities 2 program. You had the Cities 1 program. Do you think there would be value in looking at some kind of exchange visits with other countries? We saw some excellent presentations coming from China, South Africa. We will have fairly good work going on in Mexico, Brazil. Do you think there is space for this kind of an exchange visit to excite people at the city level into really recognizing what climate action can be and how a lot of things that they're already doing is really climate action?
No, thank you, sir, again. And while I'm answering your question, and I'm going back to what Raj has said, and I definitely agree with him. A lot need to be done to make take policy to practice, and we need a lot of handholding, a lot of capacity. But I still don't want to be too harsh on ourselves. Out of 126 cities, if the CSAF framework we have talked about. Whether cities understand that it is leading to climate or not leading to climate, that's a story, we can talk about it. But cities, as Raj very pointed out, has started taking those strategic actions. And out of 126 cities, 59 cities have already started working towards the CNG-based electric rickshaws, which is a major mode of transport. 88 cities have moved towards the renewable energy in the street lights. Around 88 cities are looking at monitoring their air quality. So there is a lot of strategic action happening in this 126 cities. If I take that as a 30% of the covering of urban population of India, they are already doing it. But what we need to do is really, when I say hand-holding, is hand-holding both ways. It's an individual capacity and institutional, but in individual capacity building, best way to learn, and that's my own experience, is when they see someone else actually have done it. If Coimbatore have done it, why not I can do it? If that is the within the legal framework, they can manage it, why not we manage it? So I think the exchange visits will do a lot of good things, because cities peer-to-peer learning will make much more progress than giving lectures and webinars and all. But when they see it, when they feel it, and they understand the thing, I think our people are very, I will say they understand, they have a huge experience. All they need is that guidance, that exposure, that nitty-gritty where they can understand. And I think if once they imbibe those thoughts, it can definitely happen. And I'll give you a very small example. When we started way back in Sangli Municipal Corporation, and we took them to Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation, even elected representatives. When they saw how the solid waste management was picked up, the first, and how the waste management was given even a dress code. First thing, they came back to the city and said, we want that type of a system in our place. We want every member of the corporation to be having a uniform, so that they feel dignity of labor, they feel corporatization like of atmosphere. So I think these exchange visits, both within India and abroad, will do a lot of work in building up this capacity building narrative within the country.
Thanks, Hitesh. Raj, coming back to you, I think what Hitesh is essentially saying is the problem that you pointed out, having a few pilots here is one thing, but scaling them up is another thing. And what Hitesh was suggesting is that maybe some of these exchange visits, people begin to see and believe and then start implementing. That could be one way of scaling up, is get them to see what has happened in the other place. I, for one, remember very clearly how when bus rapid transits were sort of in the early days, the first few that came up, a lot of cities began thinking about it after seeing Ahmedabad. So that sort of got them
Absolutely.
to believe that, yes, it can work. So what do you think about this? Do you think these exchange visits can be useful? Do you think
Absolutely.
using political representatives will be a good...
Nothing like seeing is believing. And especially in municipal administration, what I've seen is that when, for example, when we went to Pune, when we went to Bangalore and other places to study their pedestrian plazas and so on, it was a revelation to many of the engineers. Till the day they would say, this is not practical, just not doable. You can probably do this in New York City, but not here. The fact that an Indian city has done it and done it beautifully made a huge difference. Same thing with, like you said, we've gone to many trips to Ahmedabad to look at the bus rapid, because you always talk about Bogota, and the idea is that Bogota can do it, but we can't. So I think that attitude that it's okay in Germany, but not here is an issue. But also, very importantly, I think we need to compare apple to apple. Sometimes I do complain that if you show a Berlin or a New York City, first thing I notice is that there are hardly any human beings on the road, right? This is where a Hong Kong comes handy, a Seoul comes handy, a Shanghai comes handy. Depends on the context. I mean, when there are beautiful things in different parts of the world. So whatever it is, I think apple to apple, so that people get convinced, is one thing. I am also a big fan of templatization. I know it sounds kind of, I don't know, undemocratic, but I don't mean that you can cut and paste from another city to here. But the point is, if you take any problem, right, whether it's solar panels, whether it's a footpath, etc., the amount of thinking that has gone into any city, whether it's Bangalore, Tender Shore, or London or Paris or Shanghai, They've taken years and years and years, and some luck also. Maybe there were certain kinds of organization in that city that was able to accelerate that thinking. Now, expecting every Indian city to suddenly catch up with them in 5 days or 5 months is not practical. So you need, first of all, you need visits, absolutely, with experts on that city explaining how things were done. Second, immediate RFP, template RFPs, template thinking, template pros and cons. So, for example, we struggled endlessly with an escrow model versus so I don't know what is the other model called. You give money and you buy your own solar panel versus an escrow model where you do savings and that guy makes money, you make money type. But there are so many complications in these models that you can't expect an average engineer in a city to sit and debate this for month after month after month and expect some good result to happen. So I think all of the above. And the challenge we will face is that other cities had 100 years, 50 years, 20 years. We have very few years to catch up, which means WRIs of the world, municipal corporations of the world, everybody needs to now start accelerating, creating pilots, taking people around, creating those templates. And one more last thing I would say is that World Bank is coming to Chennai in a very big way, as part of a Chennai partnership because of the strategic projects we've done. They're supposed to invest a big amount. Tamil Nadu government is going to put a big amount in various sectors, from water, transport, and so on and so forth, right? But instead of doing a random investment, random project, there are certain fundamental studies that's getting done. So, for example, on road safety, on urban resilience, and C40 is going to help us with, let's say, climate action plan. So what we are insisting all these consultants and organization is that ultimately those reports need to translate to concrete, steel, tree, plastic, wood, because this is the BOQ, bill of quantity is the only thing governments understand, right? What do we do? When do we tender? When can we make it happen on the ground? I think we need to have that sense of urgency to say, enough theory, let us move to concrete and steel. Do you want us to plant more trees? Fine. How do you plant the tree? Which species? Which is best for the climate change? Which is the native species? These are not easy things. See, experts may know these things, but 99.99% of the people won't know. And that's not the rest of the people's job to figure out which is the right tree to plant or what is the right kind of concrete to put. But my point is, so for example, concrete itself, which is a climate-friendly concrete. We are going to make footpath. Can we go leapfrog and do climate-friendly concrete? Can we do climate-friendly drains and so on and so forth, right? So I always joke that just when we figured out how to do footpaths and drains, now somebody's coming and telling us about climate change and resilience and complicating the matter. So it shouldn't be complicated.
I think we lost Raj just when he was getting really interesting.
No, I think I came back. So I say, no matter what you call it, no matter what the theory is, let us come down to trees, plastic, wood, concrete, straight line drain versus pipe drain versus box drain, whatever, right? Let's get fast so that theory can be translated into action. There has to be a sense of urgency.
Excellent. I think, Raj, fascinating to hear you. How do we, the one thing that I have always thought in my mind is in presentations that you see at various fora like this, what you get to see is what has been achieved. Mm-hmm. What you don't get to see is how did you achieve it? What are the problems you went through? How did you get around those problems? Those things nobody tells us. And as you said, you may have taken 100 years, but at the end of 100 years, this is the great thing that I have achieved. And now you expect that since I have achieved it, you can also achieve it. Absolutely. I think that how is missing in a lot of the discussions that I see on various fora like this, not so you pointed that out very well. And I think the other point that you made is very critical when you want to translate things to the ground is, what does your 1.5 degree mean in terms of cement, steel, brick, plastic, whatever it is? Unless you are able to translate into that, the 1.5 degree means something remote. We don't know. Now, if we were to bridge that gap, what do you think would be a way of bridging that gap? Hitesh, can I ask you first on this?
Yeah.
No, sir, I think what Raj has really articulated. I think it's very well that, and you talked about, if we are talking about India to be a 5 trillion economy, unless the cities start talking about how does I relate to that fund, what is my contribution to 5 trillion economy, unless we start that linkages back, that this is what a 5 trillion economy means, and this is how you contribute to 5 trillion economy. And that has to happen with, not only just a capacity building as a tick mark of training programs, but a capacity building as a mission itself, a separate mission to really look at it and, look at economic. Why do we look at cities? There's three things: improving economic viability of city, in making a quality of life better, and keeping it sustainable. All three has to be not looked at as silo but integrated approach, and that capacity building mission has to really address all three, because all three are interrelated. They are not siloed on their own, because if you want economic development, you have to have a good investment, and if you have a good investment, you have to have a good cities with a good environment, and you need to sustain that. And all three has to begin, and I think the focus has to be, I will call it in three words: build capacity, and build capacity. Not take a capacity, just a training program and kick it off, but deep diving in, and different levels of capacity, at the leadership level, at the practitioner level, and the electric representative. So they are also oriented, they buy it. And that is where if we work out together in that scale, that is the only way we can reach that 5 trillion economy. Otherwise, it's a very wide gap between the vision and the actual ground realities in the place.
But Hitesh, tell me, I mean, what you say is very right. I mean, at least I can personally say that that is very right. The gap in capacity, to my mind, is one of the biggest barriers.
Yeah.
But then building capacity in a mission mode, as you say, needs funds. It needs money. And my own experience has been that while people talk about capacity building, they're not really, that level of interest in resourcing it seems to be limited. You won't have questions for building a metro at 20,000 crores, but to spend 2 crores on capacity building, you'll have hundreds of questions.
Exactly.
Now, what is the kind of funds available to you for this kind of an activity? Are there resources available under any of the programs? I don't know if Raj or Hitesh, whoever is able to chip in on this.
I cannot give you quantity, but what I can say is that there is a huge amount of fund which was given, and administrative and other expenses, even in the missions, which I think Arthi has just pointed out, 4,000 crores rupees in the mission for last 5 years, and the 10% was given, and out of 10%, even a 2% is allocated to a capacity building initiatives. I think we will be able to achieve the target, and it has to be very, as I told you, we have huge number of training institutes. They all are doing on their own. So if we can create the capacity grid, very focused capacity grid, make it very performance outcome and outcome oriented capacity tools, I think we will be able to mobilize and create that financing gap which is there for, as you rightly said, nobody want to do it. But if we include this whole capacity grid and build up this all the training institute, make them responsible for 3 cities or 4 cities, and they should be able to build that outcome based money to them. I think they can. You need a small seed money, but an outcome was performance based capacity building initiatives we can really create a mission on capacity building and design it like that way.
Any thoughts on the same question, Raj? Basically on resourcing capacity building.
Yeah, one of the things that I really liked about the Smart City mission was that they earlier, I mean, people look at foreign trip as some, really bad thing. Here, every meeting, higher officials from Delhi used to say, how come you guys are not going to Europe? How come you're not going to various parts of Asia, etc.? So pre-COVID, I used to joke that if I had a choice, Smart City Chennai would be like a travel and tourism department. More than any concrete project, if we could take all the engineers and officials, send them around the world on some study tour, some leisure tour, because ultimately we need to experience leisure in a different country to realize, okay, there's another way to live, right? It's not simply about sacrificing and making it sound like we should all cycle around or we should take third-rate buses, because that's the image we have, right? If bus is for poor people, cycling is for poor people, Indians are aspirational. We all want to buy cars. So the question becomes, so how come everybody in Hong Kong is going in a beautiful subway? How come everybody in Paris is hanging around in the plaza? So I think we need to understand that we are not talking about eternal sacrifice. We're talking about a better life with added advantages, right? So I would suggest that traveling, I think a smart city mission and both the state government and central government need to actively say that here's money. If you don't travel, we won't give you the money. I mean, it has to be allocated, in my opinion, because that's what happened to various schemes. If you don't spend the money, you lose the money. So people are forced to spend the money, forced to come up with DPRs and so on. If you leave it as an option, then people, if you can spend 1 rupee on concrete, why would you want to go travel? So I think we need to take it far more seriously and say that X percentage has to be spent on well-meaning, well-done training program that also involves just interacting with people from other parts of the world, right? Including other parts of India. So I think the capacity building is going to be very important. One more last bit I will say is that if organizations, whether it is Smart City, whether it's WRI, whether any other organization, many years ago I had proposed this to Chennai, right? We said take Square or part of Chennai, reimagine, because we were very frustrated that nothing was happening. We were trying to build a footpath, nothing was happening. Square piece of paper, and let's reimagine that part of Chennai. And what if it was Hong Kong? And a lot of that project, believe it or not, I am actually implementing it as part of Smart City and my team and corporation, because some the consultants were able to come back and say, look, if this was Hong Kong, this is what it would be. If this was Berlin, this is what you would do. So I would suggest that maybe, okay, take a few one big city, one medium city, and say, if you are serious about 1.5, zero carbon, etc., can we now do a quick and dirty homework and they say, this is what electricity department will do, this is what a footpath guy will do, this is what the bus guy would have done. You don't have to argue whether it's real or not. The point is, imagine a group of experts, like I just saw presentations and all, to say, this is ideal Chennai to be done, right? You would have bought buses, this is how you would have done it. You don't have to get into too many detailing of it. But what would it take for Chennai to be 50% of Hong Kong or 50% of Paris or 50% of Seoul? These are the things to be done. I think that will trigger tremendous imagination to say, you know what, I didn't realize it was that easy. I mean, I didn't realize it was this easy to decarbonize. And also keep in mind the 80-20 rule. You don't have to go solve every carbon problem. We could always say that, look, if you do these N number of projects, your carbon comes down by 80%. And thereby completely making even quality of life better, right? I think that kind of exercise will be required, in my opinion, for us to be able to leapfrog rather than doing inch by inch, trial and studying, U-turns after U-turn. We need to leapfrog. At least some cities in India have to leapfrog to, let's say, 50% of Hong Kong. I keep saying Hong Kong because it's very comparable to Chennai. I think it is time to take a few cities, at least on paper first, and then on reality, do that leapfrogging, then I think it just becomes a routine.
No, I think that's very well said, Raj. I think we've also run out of time. I don't know if Mr. Shwetal Shah is back. I see his picture, but I don't know if he can hear us, whether he's still there.
No, he's not able to join.
No, okay. So, I mean, just one last thought on this whole issue of exposure visits. You know, my own experience has been that converting an exposure visit, particularly abroad, from a shopping trip to a learning trip depends on how well you design it. If it is part of a longer, structured capacity building program, and as part of that, the person goes outside, and in that design, you provide space for shopping, he'll go for shopping only at that time. Yep. If you don't provide that shopping, he'll try to squeeze out some time to go whenever he wants. That's at least been my experience, that if you design it well, these exposure visits prove very useful. And I think Raj brought that out. So before we end, Madhav, I'll just give you a minute for any thought from your side.
Mainly, I mean, I think the conversation was fantastic. Clearly, capacity buildings is one of the pillars that we see. I think technology transfer also is the other key issue, and I think that's where also I think we could definitely support greater collaboration with some of our colleagues in China, Mexico, South Africa, to be able to exchange. So with that, really, want to thank everyone for their time, for their participation, and very happy to finally get the Coalition of Urban Transition report launched, and also I think would encourage all of you to look at the chapters on South Africa, on Mexico, on Brazil, on China, because I think these are valuable lessons for us here in India. And I think equally, I think we have a great story to tell. Given, I mean, we heard about the street lights, we heard about our renewable energy growth. I think these are incredible stories to tell other countries as well. So I think there are great opportunities to exchange, and I think this community needs to continue to build. So with that, I'll say thank you to all of you.
Thanks, Madhav, and
Thank you,
Aarti,
Madhav.
back to you.
Shwetal.
Aarti, you are the boss now.
I think Shwetal has just joined.
Thank you, everyone. This has been great, and like Mother said, a great learning experience.
I think Mr. Shah has just joined. Mr. Shah, I'm sorry we missed you. We're just winding up.
Yes, I would like to convey my best wishes to all of you, and especially for releasing this important report. Actually, I was called by Principal Secretary, and I had to rush to Sir's office. And as you all might be aware, Gujarat has some change in government. So we have to make a presentation of our activities to Honorable new CM. So I'm sorry for...
No, not at all. Fully understand.
Yes.
Fully understand given the changes taking place, and all the best to you. We really keen to see what you are able to do in Gujarat. Often you are a role model. Gujarat is a role model for other states, so we really look for you for leadership. But thank you very much for joining us. Right, Aarti, back to you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you to our panel, our moderator, all of our presenters today, and thank you to our audience for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the session.
Bye, everyone.